Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School. The weekly confessional that is correctional to all the week's rage. I'm Andreou.
And I'm Naomi Smith. Thank you for tuning in as we worship at the altar of news junkiness.
You can support our work by making a one-off donation or taking out a monthly subscription on Ko-Fi. That's ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod.
Do it now while you listen to the show. You can think of it as a sacrificial offering. Quiet Riot. So, Alex, what are the stories that have stayed with us since we recorded the main show, or have developed, or have popped up out of nowhere? I've got one to kick us off, and that's that the Green Party conference is happening this weekend as we're recording. And one thing that has come back to me from friends who are there is that friend of the show, Zach Polanski, who is the deputy leader, made his speech, and that it was joyful and very, very hopeful. And they were sort of contrasting this to some of the messaging they're hearing a lot from the government at the moment and Labour leadership, which all seems to be couched in it's going to get tougher, brace for the budget in October because things really are terrible. And that it was just bloody wonderful to hear politicians offering hope. Happiness matters, and having things to look forward to and making the world a better place. If we do it all together, we can achieve it, blah, blah, blah. Easy to do in opposition. I'm not suggesting that they're in the same position as Labour, but I think it is probably helpful for Labour speechwriters to be borrowing some of that energy to pepper into Starmer's conference speech, which is a fortnight away.
Yeah, I don't know that it's Starmer's style.
I think there is a bit too much doom and gloom.
No, I know.
This is cruelty, and it's affecting the most vulnerable children. Our party has a very clear message for Keir Starmer. Scrap the cap.
Whereas Zach is trying to capture a mood that is a really smart mood for the Green Party to capture, right? Because what the Green Party want to do is they have sort of established themselves as Labour's opposition from the left, and they want to cement that. And they want to say that we are the people offering an alternative. They will tell you that there's no alternative, but actually there is. And it's hopeful and joyous. I saw bits of Zach's speech, actually, and that kind of ebullient messaging cannot have been completely coincidental, seeing as we're watching a major party campaign develop right now in America that is based around the concept of joy. I think that's absolutely sensible for them to do, and I applaud them for it. But Labour have a 5-year timeline during which to shape their message. And I think that the more they strip it of promises at the top end, the more they hope they will get credit for things that begin to go right 2 years into their term. That is their plan, I think. I'm not sure they're getting it right, but that is their plan.
Yeah, that may well be the plan. I think there is a collective depression in the country.
Yeah.
They are our leaders, they are our government, and I think on the one hand, we need to know the truth. We need to know just how bad the Conservatives ran things for 14 years and the parlous state that Labour have found the public purse to be in once they were able to get behind the till properly. But I think we also just do need it. We need to be uplifted by our leaders. We need to know that there is a point to the suffering, that there is hope on the horizon.
Yeah.
And I just don't feel that we've heard quite enough of that from the new government yet, and I'm hoping that we might hear some of that up in Liverpool.
I think we have to wait, we just have to wait until conference and budget to complete this chapter, to have a better idea of what the message is, because I suspect a lot of the doom and gloom being injected into the national conversation at the moment is about them ditching some of the fiscal rules come budget time. The one about the debt falling in 5 years' time is so random and has been criticized for so many years by so many economists. I think they're planning to ditch it. And I think they need to make the urgency and the terribleness of what's going on big enough to justify them ditching it, because they will be attacked heavily about it by the Conservatives. So I think that's what's going on. I think their budget will arrive. I think they will loosen the fiscal rules slightly, not in a way that frightens anyone, because like I said, every economist is saying that rule is ridiculous. When your departmental spending horizon is 3 years, to have a rolling 5-year window by the end of which the debt needs to be falling means nothing. And we saw that with the Conservatives. They just said, we'll spend. And at the end of the departmental budget point, somehow we will rein in spending by 40% and the debt will be falling. It's meaningless. It's nonsense. So,
other than the budget, what else is coming up on the legislative horizon?
Laws reform, the first missives of that happened this week. The Renters' Bill is coming next week, and I think that's brilliant, because it's something that the Conservative government has been promising for coming on 10 years now and didn't get round to doing. So I think Labour managing to get that bill going in their first 100 days really does send a message. There was quite a funny story this week about none of the Tories being selected in the lottery for private members bill. I'm sure you saw it, right?
I did. And yes, given the number of MPs they have compared to parties which did have some success in the lottery, it raised quite a few eyebrows. So quite a lot of mathematicians calculating just how bad luck it is to have 121 MPs and not get even one PMB.
I don't think it's behind closed doors, because I've seen photos of them literally picking little balls out of a sort of thing like tombola.
It really just isn't their year, huh?
But that's also something that happens, right? When things don't go your way, they really don't go your way. What else? You did a fabulous episode on Wales.
Thank you. Yes, Will Hayward. You obviously interviewed him previously, but a fascinating
I'm a big fan, as you know.
On Welsh politics.
The stuff that's going on there with the super constituencies, with everything being merged and rammed through, and basically they're changing the electoral system there. And I am astonished that as a politics obsessive, I'd heard nothing about that.
No, neither did I. And I obsessed around the boundary changes for Westminster elections more than almost anyone in the country. Best of Britain were the first organisation to put out MRP polling under the new boundaries as were published last year ahead of any other organisation. And it had completely passed me by that the constituencies for the Senate were in Cardiff were also being redrawn. I had just not clocked it, which tells you everything about how SW1 focused 99% of political discourse in this country is.
But we are changing that.
Yeah, go and have a listen if you haven't.
Yeah, do have a listen.
To do that one yet.
What else? Patel was knocked out. There's another vote at the tail end of the coming week that will knock a second candidate out.
So we'll go from 5 to 4.
There's no leader speech at the Tory conference. We found out
4 wannabe leader speeches, presumably.
Because Sunak apparently doesn't want to take the spotlight away from the 4 candidates, but really it's because he's checked out. I mean, Sunak, I was looking at his Twitter, he's tweeted like 4 times since
But do you know what? In a way, fair play to him, because I cannot imagine Truss in the same situation not wanting to do a valedictory, me.
She probably will.
I'm sure she will. But I kind of like the post-PM Sunak humility.
I thought he could have taken a little bit more of an interest in, for instance, foreign policy, offered his support a little bit more, because he owes that much to Starmer.
What's Cameron up to in the Lords? Has he carried on being active since?
I don't know, Talking about shitty ex-PMs, I was really annoyed by Johnson's intervention on the matter of immigration. I mean, last week he was mouthing off about Labour want Hamas to win. This week it comes up with, Labour must reinstate the Randa plan, otherwise every death in the Channel will be on their conscience. On a week when a boat capsized and there were deaths in the Channel. And I just think that is such a cheap intervention. But then again, if you didn't understand what was involved in his position when he was serving in it, I don't know why I expected him to understand what decorum is expected of him as a former PM, right?
No.
And yet there it is. It really annoyed me because I thought it's cheap. It made the same idiotic point about Germany adopting the Randa scheme. They're doing nothing of the kind. They're literally just looking at using the accommodation that Randa built for our scheme in order to do offshore processing, which is a completely different thing.
Speaking of Germany, we've got a deep dive on all things German politics.
Oh, yes, with Annette. I love Annette. I'm glad that particular interview has gotten so much traction and so much kudos because she really is masterful at cutting through the tripe and getting to the heart of really quite difficult points. So, yes, I would really advise people to go listen to that. Starmer continued his European charm offensive with a visit to Ireland on Friday and Saturday. And, when we put out a thing saying there is a sequencing to getting closer to the European Union, and loads of listeners got annoyed with us and saying, why are you saying we can't just go rejoin? I have tried to explain this, I don't know how many times. It's not our choice anymore. It's the choice of 27 other nations that have to be unanimous about it. If Malta doesn't want us to join, we don't get to join. If Cyprus doesn't want us to join, we don't get to join. So before making some grand announcement that we want, customs union, what needs to proceed is the hard work of rebuilding relations with each country individually. And that's what Starmer is doing.
And Ireland are, such a key strategic player in all of that because they are often much more able to be an honest broker between the EU corporately and the UK because we have a very special relationship with Ireland. We have a common travel area. We have a Good Friday Agreement in place. And actually, Hilary Benn has made a very good speech this week reinforcing their commitment to doing absolutely everything to uphold the integrity of the Good Friday Agreement and to implement the Windsor Framework fully. That matters because as we go into October, the second phase of the Windsor Framework comes into force. And the more that the UK can be seen to be a trusted ally that is abiding by an agreement, the more likely we are to be able to extract things that we want from that closer relationship, that reset, that better trading deal that the new government has talked about when it comes up to the review period in 2026. So you're right, this is all part of that. But what matters is to not diverge from where EU standards and regulations are at the moment. So Labour aiming for beneficial alignment with the EU gives British business certainty now. It means that they can make plans, they can get investment into the business, they can know that it's a particular set of standards to which they need to be producing product and service for export. Because if we diverge and do eventually want to have an even closer relationship, join the single market, customs union, etc., if we've diverged, then that becomes much, much harder. The more aligned we can say, if and when we want to rejoin any of the institutions, alignment will make that much, much quicker and simpler.
Quiet, Riot. And the biggest story, of course, of the week that hangs over everything is the Grenfell report.
Of course.
Just seeing people's testimonies from that night and thinking back to what it was to, wake up and find that story developing. It was really quite an extraordinary thing.
And it was horrendous, and I remember it very vividly. But in a way, nothing could have prepared me for just how awful a crisis it would be, because on the night, I thought, oh, this is a a horrible, terrible accident that has happened to a building. It's only in the days afterwards that we hear about the flammable cladding and just how many buildings are wrapped in it, that the true horror picture emerges. I mean, it really is the stuff of nightmares.
I was seeing an interview with Paul Boating. Do you remember Paul Boating?
I do.
So he was talking about Grenfell, and this is an unrelated point, but Paul Boating was the very first cabinet minister of colour in the UK, and that was 2002.
Incredible.
And 6 years later, the States had a black president.
Yeah.
Now, I find that really quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
It just doesn't fit in my head.
Sticking with Grenfell, you and I both were very moved by the Guardian cartoon of the bonfire of red tape with the red tape flames licking up against the Grenfell Tower.
Yeah. I mean, because this is something we've been saying for so many years, haven't we?
Yeah, that this war on regulation, that I hasten to add, all of the Tory leadership candidates appear to be going hard on still.
On the week that this report is out.
Indeed.
I mean,
do you remember during the referendum when a Brexiter tried to set alight an EU flag
and couldn't,
and it wouldn't light precisely because EU safety standards, those, you know, that nice piece of regulation to keep us all safe meant that it was not flammable.
It was poignant to be reminded. I know it wasn't that long ago, but it really was poignant to be reminded of all that stuff. Have it brought back so sharply, I think, with that cartoon, the power of an image, what it means to burn red tape, what it means to shrink the state, what it means to deregulate aggressively.
Health and safety gone mad.
It's ridiculous, right? Because it's our health, it's our safety. Very rich people who own the media in this country have managed to turn working people against the regulation that protects them at work and at home in their everyday lives and as consumers, is genuinely one of the most extraordinary feats of propaganda. They turned an entire country against the regulations that were there to protect them.
What other stories? Are there any? I mean, I guess we've not talked enough about the US.
It's a very US week next week.
We've had that whole scandal of Russia funding influencers to get involved in the presidential
It's
election.
astonishing, I think, Naomi. Basically, it came out that through some shell company, Russia was paying millions of pounds to various influencers in over 60 countries, and we don't know which ones in our country were being paid by Russian money, right? They're all on the right wing, pretty much. And they were paying all these people to basically put out the sort of stories that they approve of. And you have Republican proxies at the moment going on network news and saying it's not a problem because all these people believed all that stuff before anyway. So it's not like they've changed their messaging to suit Russia. It's just Russia has chosen people whose messaging it liked to sponsor them. And I just think, what the fuck are you talking about? I mean, this is foreign interference writ large.
You can't have the FBI, and this is probably CIA laundered, and the Department of Justice spilling this out through press conferences and through leaks to mainstream media reporters on the eve of election, and then you're going to have a 24-hour, maybe 48-hour news cycle on CNN, on MSNBC, and it's just going to wash over the people, even the casual viewers that are just clicking around. That does have an impact. That's more election skullduggery than what the Russians are doing.
So I think that story will run and run. Trump is having a very strange week in general, and he's been quite incoherent. There's been a lot of clips of him going around where he's making zero sense. And it's, of course, the big debate next week on the 10th. So that's Tuesday night, our early Wednesday morning.
I'm desperately going to try and not be awake to watch it. I'm assuming you desperately will be awake and desperately
obviously.
Quiet Riot. Well, there is another story, isn't there, in Europe
Quite a big one. Yes.
that I think probably deserves its own segment.
That's the return of Michel Barnier to frontline politics. He was appointed as a sort of unity prime minister in France by Macron. The appointment was greeted by the Telegraph with a Michael O'Flynn piece titled "Bringing Back Barnier is Proof That Macron Loathes Britain."
This self-obsession.
I honestly think that will...
No world leader does anything other than try and fuck over Britain.
I genuinely think that might be the funniest take I've ever read. The idea that Emmanuel Macron is sitting there at the Elysee Palace fighting for his political life while people march out in the streets, unable to find a solution. And he thinks, right, which candidate is going to piss Brexiters off more? It just says such extraordinary things about the way they see the world. Anyway, I spoke to our favorite French connection, our own Chevalier, Olivier Morel, to get his reaction to this development. And here's what he told me. Hello, Olivier. Thank you for joining us.
Lovely to hear from you.
What was your reaction to Macron appointing Barnier?
Well, in a way, I mean, I think not many people, knew who was. There were so many in the running that in the end, I think people got a bit tired of, hearing that
Yes.
so and so might come, so and so might not. The visits to the palace, etc. Where I think it's not an illogical position to be in. If you'd said that straight after the vote back in July, most people would have said, are you insane? But given what's happened since, probably ends up being the least likely to fail, if I can put it that way. He's not well known even from the French public. There were some polls in France, and some people don't even know it, particularly young people, because he's been a politician. He was the youngest MP at 27 back when he was first elected a long time ago in the early 80s. So people have forgotten. I think they associate him with Brexit mainly.
Yeah. He's been at the Commission for a long time, I think.
Correct.
Can you tell me, why do you think has Macron chosen to appeal to the right rather than the left, considering the left actually won the election?
I will disagree there. I think no one's won the election. I think, as we know, there are kind of broadly three blocks. You've got the sort of the left, the Nouveau Front Populaire, the New Popular Front, which is a grouping of, some would argue, we have an expression in French, the la carpe et le lapin. So it's a breeding between a fish and a rabbit. So these are people between Mélenchon and the socialists, the communists and the Greens that agree very, very little in common. Anyway, they form this grouping, which forms broadly a bloc. You then have the far right of Marine Le Pen and a few of the what used to be the traditional right who kind of line themselves with her. And then you've got broadly the center, which is Macron's party, and the more moderate or straightforward conservatives, the right. So you've got these three blocks. So no one's really won. No one can command a majority. And so I think what he's done, and Mélenchon is screaming blue murder, and his party is, which is, I suppose, to be expected. They're saying the election was stolen and they should be in power. The person they finally alighted on, Lucie Castet, who they had a very long process, as we know, of trying to identify a person, and they went round the shop, literally. I mean, they tried to, fair enough, they were trying to find someone who everyone's looking for consensus. The trouble is, her first kind of utterance was that she was going to apply the program, all the program, and nothing but the program of the far left. And then she proceeded not talking to anyone else. When you want to build coalitions, you really have to talk to people, I'm afraid, even people you might disagree with. I think they have to change software, really, and she's not the only one. Yeah. And she then declared, stamped her foot and declared it was going to be a program, then embarked on a kind of mini Tour de France of meeting people, which she was, it's very nice to talk to their electors. They were the wrong crowd to talk to. She needed to talk to her political opponents. I'm sorry. And I think her posturing, if I can only call it that, smacks of someone who doesn't really want power. They want to say, look, I'm, straight up. I don't want, I'm not going to dilute my program, and I can look outraged when I'm not elected, which is a very Mélenchon posture. So that's where I think.
If I accept that,
yeah,
shouldn't she have been allowed to fail then? If that was the choice of the choice of the block of the three, that ended up with the most votes. Shouldn't she have been allowed to go to the parliament and be voted down because she hadn't made those alliances that she needed to make? And then Macron, I think, would have a more legitimate cause to look elsewhere, right?
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And to be, I suppose some say, more democratic because, let Parliament decide that she's not the right person. I take that. Rightly or wrongly, he probably thought there was a lesser chance of her succeeding than others. Only history will tell. What I also find interesting is when the left is saying that why is he picked someone from the right and not in their camp? There was another candidate that Macron saw and some say might have been appointed, was the former socialist prime minister Bernard Cazeneuve, who is a sort of traditional socialist. But at the first utterance of his name, the Socialist Party, we will not support it, which is a bit. So you have the resurgence of all the Socialist Party's factions and the infighting, which has been the story of the left for quite some time. So that's why I think, yes, I accept that you could have said she let her go. I'm not sure with her stance. I think it was also a bit clumsy politically of her to say that. You set out your stall like this. What are you going to achieve? And I suppose, as I say again, Michel Barnier is a sort of centre-right. He's not quite in his early career. Chirac nicknamed him the ski instructor as a sort of mocking monitor, because he was never part, I think, of the small little coterie of Paris.
Yes.
And of course he was the man who was the architect of the Winter Olympics in his native Savoie. He was never part of these little Parisian sort of small circles of very small circle of people who all know each other and rub each other's back, shall we say.
The reason I'm poking at the route that Macron took to this decision is because I saw some really fascinating polling. I was looking at a lab did some quite extensive polling on this, and they've ended up with the majority of the French public thinking that Barnier is probably a sensible choice. So by, I think, 53%. But also 3/4 of voters thinking that Macron ignored the result of the election. And that's what causes me to think that he did something strategically wrong in there. That if they agree with the result, if he had found a different route to the result, then he wouldn't be in a position where there's now a majority actually for him to be impeached.
Well, first of all, I think that it speaks to the rejection of him personally. I think he's now triggering this kind of almost visceral rejection. And as you say, isn't it a paradox that people say, oh, we actually agree with Michel Barnier itself, but the impeachment, that's a non-starter. Again, it's something which has been, if you talk to any reasonable constitutionalist, they will tell you this is a complete non-starter. And talking about polling, actually, there was something less scientific than you. I can't compete with Naomi for the nerd. I'm not going to get to that level. But I looked at something quite interesting. Someone looked at, it's called Poil à gratter, Jean-Luc Aime, and I'll credit him AYME, because he does something, which is what it is, but it's quite interesting. And what he's looked at, rather than the second round and the result, he's looked at the first round, because as we know, because you have two rounds, in the second round people do deals, agree stuff, and it does not necessarily reflect what actually people want, what the voters have voted for. Only the first round is actually a true reflection of what people want, and the country is still very split 2 or 3 ways. But he's looked at three recent elections: presidential in 2022, parliamentary in 22 as well, that followed, and then the recent ones. And what you see is the trend is that right-wing parties have polled just over 40% in the first round in the presidential election. Left-wing were just over 30, and centre were 25. And going on through to the recent election, the right-wing parties are just under 45. The centre is 23, which is a sharp drop, which is a support of Macron dropping. And the left-wing parties have declined a bit. They are over 30%. So to the argument that why have you appointed a politician from the right, actually the public, you could argue, are slightly more, and as the poll would reflect, you just mentioned, slightly more right wing.
The political center of gravity, basically,
Yes,
if you take everything into account,
correct.
is
Yes.
slightly to the right of center.
Yes, exactly. And that's in a way where Barnier, I don't think that's what Macron has picked him. There has been a long process and he ended up, some people say in his close circle that, we had Barnier on the cards. I don't know what the reality is of that. They've had him, marked for a long time. I don't know what the reality is. But I tend to agree with most of the French public, which would be nasty to say it's the least of the bad, a bad lot. He's not. I think he's a very solid, competent, and if anyone's going to succeed, it's him.
I mean, he's even tempered, and he's very, very experienced because of Brexit now in negotiating, which I guess is the main skill that he will need if he is to pass any kind of legislation. Especially the budget, which I understand will be the first big hurdle, basically, because it needs to be cut quite significantly. So his task at the moment is to, I guess, keep the center and center-right happy, keep Marine Le Pen's party on board, avoid completely outraging the left, so that we don't end up in a sort of perma-demonstration situation while cutting the budget. I mean, that seems a really difficult task ahead.
It's a tough gig. I agree, but I don't think there was, coming back to that. I think if anyone's going to succeed, and I watched his speech in France. I think it's a nicer tradition than here, if I can say. The outgoing minister, prime minister, and all the government welcomes his successor or her successor on the steps of the given building that they're going to occupy, and there's an outgoing speech and incoming, and he was very non-committal, except to say that he was going to talk to everyone, which I think is it doesn't say much, but at least it's the right start. Unlike others who've decided from the word go that he would not talk to X, Y, Z, at least he's going to. And as you say, he managed in the Brexit negotiation. I was going to say his hardest task was not so much the Brits, although they were a challenge, but it's keeping 27 countries all on board for that long process. That was quite an extraordinary feat.
So, all in all, would you say that the Left Alliance overplayed its hand a little bit, considering they only had just over a third of the vote, overreached slightly and so have ended up with nothing? Or was their aim all along to not go into government? And the reason I bring that up is because it's what Alexis Tsipras did in Greece. When he was in a similar situation, he didn't really want to go into a coalition, into a minority government, because they tend to make left parties very unpopular very quickly. He preferred to be in opposition, criticizing what a broad coalition of parties was doing, because it boosted his vote for next time. So was there something strategic there in the left coalition, or did they just overplay their hand?
I think it's a bit of both. Sorry to be
no, that's fine.
But I think there was a bit of both. You're absolutely right. I think, as I've alluded to before, I think Lucy Caste's posture of I will be completely 100% myself and the program or nothing but the program, Mélenchon and people like that are probably playing everyone is looking at 2027, the next presidential election, which is the big one. No one wants really, as you say, I mean, it's a poison chalice to say, and that's to say little about being in government right now. So I think there was that. There was the overplaying by, some, yes. And you see, you and others say, oh, the left has won, and they regard this grouping as one. I can see, I bet you can come back and I can hit my hat if I'm wrong, but that group, as soon as they're confronted with the reality of voting on this and that issue, is more likely to fracture.
Could it fracture even sooner if
possibly
Barnier offers some of the ministerial appointments?
The consensus is that he will possibly peel off some kind of trophy characters from the left. You had at one stage a long time ago, Sarkozy did it with Frédéric Mitterrand, the nephew of the former president, as culture, for instance. That kind of they're not people who are in the day-to-day kind of running of parties. They're not at the cold front, but they're regarded as the left. And don't forget that the Greens in France are a different breed to the Greens in Germany, who very much work with the machine of government. I think the Green see themselves and are seen as a sort of forever opposing, but he may try and appeal to some people on the left, just so that he's not if anything, he's not accused of simply running a centre or right wing government. I think Marine Le Pen declared a long time ago anyway, and she's looking at 2027 again. She's playing the same card, which is I'm in opposition and I'm a grown up. I'm no longer what I used to be. Mélenchon, of course, will carry on. And it's interesting that you mentioned demonstrations, and I think that people will carry on demonstrating. Whether there are hundreds of demonstrations all the time in France. It's a country that demonstrates about everything. So unless they are, massive and the country is brought to a standstill as it was in the mid-90s, it's hard to judge whether this will have. Mélenchon will carry on huffing and puffing as he does anyway. Yeah, that's my take.
If it all collapses, can Macron call another election?
No, there has to be a year.
Right.
Until it's whatever it was, 7th of July. So the next one or the two, the first round was July. So he can't do that until for another year.
Quiet Riot.
And final question: The Telegraph greeted the news with a piece entitled "Bringing Back Barnier is Proof that Macron Loathes Britain."
Oh God! Oh my God! Yes, that is so. You see, even the August BBC, I happened to hear something, and they were referencing Barnier in reference to Brexit, and my reaction is like, it doesn't even feature on the radar. It's just such a non-thing. Britain has got to stop being obsessed, particularly the Telegraph, with the fact that the French spend their entire time, Macron and everyone, about what Britain will feel about this or not feel about this. Sorry, I was going to be rude, but I'm not going to be. But we don't give a flying, monkey.
Olivier Morel, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
Let's have you back in the studio very, very soon as you're back.
My pleasure. Thank you, Alex. Have a good Sunday.
And that is it for this week's Quiet Riot Sunday School.
It turned out to be quite a bumper edition, didn't it?
It did.
Remember, you can follow us on social media, including Blue Sky at Quiet Riot Pod, or email us on quietriotpod@gmail.com.
We have lots, and I do mean lots of goodies planned for the next few weeks, including, fingers crossed, an appearance from John Curtis, polling guru, and then we'll have a full episode, as usual, for you all on Thursday. Thank you very much for sharing a little slice of your Sunday with us.
Yeah, and enjoy the rest of the weekend. We love you lots, and we'll speak soon.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads, with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canelu. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global. Quiet Riot.
You've gone a little bit low energy. You've gone a little bit sexy, Pimley Cat.
Okay.